Welcome to UTOKing with Gregg. I'm here today with Manuel Manga. He is the founder, managing partner of the Institute of Evolutionary Leadership, which is a social enterprise that builds leadership capacity across sectors to redesign worldviews, cultures, and institutions in service of a more just, sustainable, and flourishing world. I love that.
Thank you.
Manuel has a remarkable background. He's engaged and been trained by some of the leading scholars in the world. And Manuel has a real powerful visionary angle on where we are and where we might be headed and how we might lead ourselves there. Manuel, thanks so much for coming on. It's great to see you.
Gregg, thank you so much for the invitation. It's great to know you and to know of your work. And I have had the pleasure to listen to some of the other interviews, and I really appreciate the work that you've done with them. People like Lene, Rachel Anderson, and Thomas Jorksman, and others.
Great. Wonderful. It's wonderful to have you in the lineup, my friend. It's I know you fit brilliantly in these circles. But why don't we just start a little bit? You have such a rich life narrative to tell. I often ask individuals to start with their story. What's some of their history? What makes them tick? And that'd be great for the listeners, I think, to get your rich narrative.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I would say that I have a curious mind, and I grew up I was born in Colombia, but I moved to New York City when I was 13 years old. And one of the things that I discovered in New York City was the New York City Public Library on 42nd Street. And to me, it was like a kid in a candy store.
Wow.
You know, it's like millions of books, and you could go there and read. And I love the New York City Public Library system. Without knowing it, I would love to read books about art and architecture and philosophy. And it was like a smorgasbord of knowledge. 42nd Street Library.
About what age were you? Were you a precocious child?
When the time I discovered the New York City Library, I was like 16.
Okay.
Because it took me a while to go from my high school to kind of walk around New York City and get to know, the whole thing. So to me, the library system was before the internet,
Right. No, definitely.
And if you had a library card, you had access to all the knowledge.
Right. Yeah, I was a late bloomer on that. I didn't become really a knowledge geek until like late in college. In high school, I was smoking pot and skipping school. So that was my story, but whatever,
Right. So then I went to college and I started college, and just give you a brief background.
Yeah.
And I took courses like Foundations of Western Thought when I was a freshman.
Okay.
In City College. And I wanted to understand that, there was a background question like, who is this animal, the human being?
Right.
And what does philosophy have to do with this? What can it tell me? And so I was very curious. And I was also studying psychology. So I took a psychology course. I took a philosophy course.
Beautiful.
So I was like searching for what makes humans human.
Love it.
And so I was in that. But then I have to say that my academic took a turn, my academic curiosity and life, because I went from being a full-time student to a part-time student in New York City, and it was during the Vietnam War.
Wow.
And me being a good person, I told my draft board that I was now a part-time student instead of full-time student. And then I got a letter that they drafted me.
Wow.
So I was drafted into the U.S. Army during the Vietnam War, and I spent 2 years in the Army. And I came out a veteran of the Vietnam era. But those 2 years made me think about the human condition.
Wow.
made me think about why are we doing this, and why are we in Vietnam, and why are we doing war, and what's the purpose of humans?
Right.
So even though I was in the Army, I was still continuing my philosophical inquiry.
That's really interesting. Can you tell us a little bit about kind of what you were involved in for those 2 years?
Interesting enough, I was trained, maybe because I had my college education and my scores were pretty high.
Sure.
Instead of being the regular infantry person,
Right.
I was trained in public information. I was a PIO specialist,
Gotcha.
and I was assigned to the public information officer. And that, you know, which was perfect because I did a lot of research. I read papers and
Right.
And hold on a second.
Yeah, no worries.
So my curiosity was there. And I was reading the New York Times every day.
Right.
And with most people in the Army would not be reading the New York Times. I would go to the library. And so that's my relationship. You know, that was my sanctuary. I would go to the library and read the New York Times, and the New York Times would say what was going on in Vietnam. The Army would say something a little bit different, and you know, my friends would say something. So you know, it's like you had to navigate all of that. So I was a good soldier, and you know, I spent 2 years in the service. But when I came out, I realized that it was a tragic war in many ways, and so then I started also thinking, what do we do about human evolution? What do we do about making a better world? So, you know, those seeds were kind of in my mind.
Of course.
And so, of course, when I left, graduated from the service, 1967, you know, it was civil rights movement, the hippies.
Right, relaxing time, right? Vietnam, civil rights.
and you know, I got to march and different things. And so I was still curious. And so it was from there. And the good news was that I got my GI Bill education money. So I was able to, you know, go back to college. I went to UMass. And I said, well, I'm going to continue studying psychology and find out what do we do with this human person?
Right.
So my curiosity was still there. And I was really grateful to UMass, Amherst, and then UMass Boston, where, I studied things like Carl Rogers, Maslow, all the humanists. I
know those guys.
I got a degree. I figured we got to figure out how to make the human more human.
Beautiful.
Especially coming out of the Vietnam era.
Right.
And of course, during the 60s, I had a chance to listen to people like Bucky Fuller. And I had a chance to read his book, Operating Manual for Spaceship Earth. And I said, wow, this is amazing.
Right.
But how do we implement this?
Right.
How do we put this into action? So on the one hand, you have big thinkers like Bucky Fuller. On the other hand, you have people like Maslow, Rogers, saying the human potential. And eventually...
Actually, let me pause you there for a sec, because I'm embarrassingly ignorant about Bucky Fuller, and so Bucky Fuller is an unbelievably innovative individual. And one of my to-do items is to deep dive into his vision. And so here I have somebody who is much better versed. Can you share with me some of what you saw and what you believe his vision means to us today?
Perfect. So Bucky, the first time that I went to one of his seminars, he was focusing on what he called Operating Manual for Spaceship Earth.
Spaceship Earth, right. That's a famous line he's got.
Right. And so the concept that we are on the spaceship was important, and that two key points that came out of that seminar. One is that we have all the knowledge and everything, knowledge, technology, resources to make all of humanity successful. All of humanity successful.
Wow.
So
Yep.
keep point number one. That's a very important evolutionary point. And the
Right.
second point is that we humans now are you could say, the pilots of the spaceship, but we are not, you could say we didn't go to school for pilot school. So it's like
Nice.
giving you a
Right.
747 and saying, Fred, fly this 747, well, you're going to crash it.
Right. That's a really powerful metaphor. Yeah.
Right. So having those visions, seeds planted in me, and, I was like 24, 25 years old. I didn't really know what to do with it at that time. I knew there was something amazing there. And so when he said that, so that was his first thing, that we had this capacity, all the knowledge and resources. So in that sense, he was an integral thinker.
Right. Right.
And it wasn't until many years later, I went to several seminars with him over the years, that in one of his last books called Critical Path, where I have a signed copy by him.
Oh, cool.
And Bucky basically, in the first 20 pages of that book, he basically says everything he's ever wanted to say. If you want to read a summary of Bucky Fuller, read the first 20 pages of Critical Path.
Gotcha.
And he basically says the same thing. We have all the knowledge, technology, money, resources to go from what he calls weaponry to livenry. Isn't that amazing? From weaponry to livenry. And of course, I mean, he spells it all out. And he talks about all the money that we spend on wars every year in military spending. If we put that into creating humanity successful, we could do it. And, so he's been saying that since 1969. And when he died in 1983, he was still saying the same thing.
Wow.
So
he's like the original Game B guy.
Exactly. But here's the thing where I'm going to connect this to my work of evolutionary leadership.
Yes, I was definitely going to ask you about that. Perfect.
Because one of the things that I saw missing in Bucky's, you could say, great plan for the great evolution from, you could say, for humanity, was who was going to do it, and who and how, and do it. And I think that was, he kept saying the little individual. He gave a lot of credit to the little individual, but the little individual sometimes needs help. And one of the things that I saw was, needs to become a leader.
Right.
Needs to learn leadership competencies. You can't just read the book and say, I'm going to do it tomorrow. Again, that's like saying, well, here's the keys to the 747. Go fly it. Well, sorry, you got to go to pilot school.
Totally.
I think we need to go to leadership school to navigate this spaceship. But he didn't talk about that. So, but he did give me the vision, and you could say that we are all interconnected, interdependent. Because don't forget, he's a systems thinker.
Totally.
Okay.
Wow, that's.
So let me pause there for a second.
Yeah. So
if you have any questions.
Yeah, no, I have. First off, that's I'd heard Spaceship Earth, but I really, the way you articulated the piloting, and at the same time, we don't have the training and what we are. And then this question about how we are going to cultivate our pilot school on the, what are we actually doing? And then we actually need this sort of conscious awareness and the evolution of leadership to guide us in a particular way. It's just that so resonates so deeply with me in terms of what I'm seeing, where we are and what we need to go. So how long have you been involved in the Institute of Evolutionary Leadership? I mean, where did that come about? Is there more history you want to give?
Yeah, let me
go into that.
Maybe 2 more minutes on the history.
Totally. No, there are several other people I need to ask you about here
no, that's true. That's good.
Especially Humberto Maturana. I definitely need to get into.
Well, in terms of Bucky Fuller, so interesting from UMass, just to finish my academic background a little bit. I realized that if we wanted to make the human successful as an individual, we needed a successful society or culture. So I went to BU to study what we call social psychology.
Yeah.
So I did graduate work in social psychology, and one of my papers was if you want to have a sane human being, you need a sane society.
Oh, wonderful.
I'm
actually teaching social psych. I literally stopped. I'm developing my syllabus for social psych. So I know a little bit about social psych. I'm teaching my grad students social psych this summer.
So, I read, in those days, I read Eric Fromm.
Yeah.
The Sane Society, and the same, he's another evolutionary thinker.
Yeah.
Because, he said we live in an insane society and we need to evolve it to a sane society. And that's where I, finished my graduate work. And I said, well, you need a systemic synergy between the healthy individual and the healthy society, and the two would go hand in hand. And so I graduated from BU, went to work in a therapeutic environment to practice my psychology, and also feed my 2 children and live in Cambridge in those days. And from there, I went to work to a high-tech company. I got recruited into a high-tech company called Digital Equipment Corporation, DEC. And they gave me the job to say, well, we are kind of crazy over here because we're engineers,
right?
And basically help us evolve and transform and make us into better leaders. And that's how I got my leadership training. So it was all coming together. And I learned all kinds of leadership, you could say, technologies, theories. I mean, we had so much money in digital that, I could study with the best thinkers. I studied with people like Peter Senge and, people like that at MIT, learning about making learning organizations, systems thinkers, Donella Meadows, all these people around MIT, etc.
Were there any particular leadership or organizational ideas that you really were moved and influenced by?
Yes, I would say that the systems thinking approach that Peter Senge brought, and also people like Donella Meadows brought into this thing was really key. Other people like Ronald Heifetz, I don't know if you read a lot that he calls adaptive leadership, was also influential. He teaches at Harvard. People like Robert Keegan.
Well, I know that.
Yeah, the evolving
self.
Evolving self. So it all started to come together. So for 12 years, I was teaching leadership, but I wasn't contributing to the big picture. Of going back to Bucky Fuller for a minute.
Right.
So it wasn't until I left that company and started doing consulting work on my own that I realized that we needed a different kind of leadership to put into action some of the ideas of great thinkers like Bucky Fuller or Eric Fromm or the other people that I came in contact with, like Maturana, etc. And that's where the beginning of the emergence of evolutionary leadership came to be.
Perfect.
Okay, let me just stop there for any questions.
No, that's okay. So, you get the Bucky Fuller frame of mind. You go, you learn about leadership. You're invested in the particular company, but then all of a sudden you kind of evolve and you have this horizon view. It's like, wait a minute, we actually need to cultivate a leadership at a higher level of organization.
Got it. Yeah. And just around that time, when I started formulating this evolutionary leadership, at least my version, because later on I discovered that other people had some similar ideas, some other colleagues, my version of evolutionary leadership. I also discovered the work of Jonas Salk, which is
Yes.
I want to bring him in as another influential teacher in my journey. I happened to listen to a lecture of his and also read one of his books that's called Survival of the Wisest, which is not survival of the fittest. It's survival of the wisest, in which he proposes we need to go from epoch A to epoch B. And epoch A has a set of values and worldviews and problems that we cannot solve unless we evolve to a new mind in epoch B with a new set of values, a new mindset, and a new culture. So we have to transcend, evolve from epoch A, where we are today, to epoch B. And then I wrote to him at the Salk Institute, which is still in La Jolla, California.
Sure.
They're still active. So I was like enthusiastic person, and I wrote to him, and he was kind enough to send me a big envelope in those days. I don't think I had a computer yet. Digital had computers. We had big computers, but there wasn't that much personal.
They were the size of a room or something.
So here in this envelope, I opened the envelope, and there's a paper that him and his son, Peter Salk, wrote that is called Solving the World's Problems. It's like about 20-page paper. And this is based on a talk he did at the United Nations in Paris.
Okay, wow.
And so here, not only he's a biologist, but here he puts on the hat of an evolutionary psychologist.
Wow.
Which he's not very well known for.
Yeah, no, I had no idea. Of course, he's just an icon in biology as far as I'm
Exactly. So he basically says, look, we humans are obviously a biological animal, sapiens, and all the world problems that we are facing are the source of the mind. All of them. He says there, the mind, the thinking, and the emotions and the values that we have will not help us to solve the problems that we have. In fact, all of the problems we have originate in the mind that we have today.
Nice.
So he did a diagnosis of the entire species.
Sounds like I would concur as my metapsychological hat.
So he's like, excuse me, Dr. Salk, but I think we have a problem with humanity. Come in, have a seat. You know?
Right. So, all right, let me do a workup here, and I'll generate a 20-page summary of the assessment.
Exactly.
We'll start with the presenting problem, the developmental history, where it went awry.
Where did you get this problem from? You know, Stone Age. Oh, it started happening around 200,000 years
Something
ago.
clocked me on the head, and then I got the... had some problems in relationship, you know.
I burned a few forests. I killed a few animals that drove to extinction.
Got drunk, started eating mushrooms, you know.
You got it. And now we got an atomic bomb. I don't know what to do with it.
Amen.
So his conclusion is, if all the problems that we have originate in the mind, which includes the values, the narratives, the emotions, because he talks about the emotions, then we need to evolve to a new mind. And that is what he calls a metabiologic evolution. And he quoted the word metabiologic, because it's beyond the biology. So you got the physics, you got the chemistry, you got the biology, just like you talk in your tree of knowledge. Yeah. And I mean, this paper has it all. I can send it to you.
Yeah, that'd be beautiful.
And he said, well, now we need to go to the metabiological and go from epoch A, which is where we're having all these problems in the 20th century, to epoch B, and he spells out the mind, the values, etc., the culture that we need to evolve. And I said, terrific. Who's going to do this? I go
we
back.
got the Bucky Fuller question. Who's driving this 747?
Who's driving this 747? So we got that we got a spaceship.
Right.
Wow, we got
Right.
a beautiful spaceship. Check.
Now we got to funnel it through Epoch B.
Exactly.
That's what it's gonna
We gotta
steer it
land
to Epoch
this
B. You got to land it in Epoch B, and who the hell's going to do that?
I mean, it's going 25,000 miles per hour.
Right. And no one went to pilot school.
And nobody went to pilot school. We better not get. And it's got a few atomic bombs in it.
Right. The things are ticking. It's like
in the luggage.
The luggage. And if that goes, that's the whole system.
We better land this thing pretty smoothly, So
Yeah, no doubt.
I said, oh my God, what am I going to do with this evolutionary leadership? So I started putting it together. And the vision was we need evolve from Epoch A to Epoch B. And then I started giving Epoch B some titles like sustainability. And then I would say justice, because if we don't have justice, some people interpret sustainability as, only nature, ecology.
Right.
And sustainability has to be also human. So then I finally said justice, sustainability, and flourishing. So that's the three key words that I put in.
In fact, I have a little map right here that you worked out on this, right? In terms of Epoch B. There it is. I know most people are listening to video, but I mean audio. So, but there is a whole sort of a visionary framework of these parts and how we might create a visual schematic.
So I started off in Boston with, I called the Center for Evolutionary Leadership back in 1995. And of course, not many clients, not many people were knocking on my door and saying, hey.
The 747 actually doesn't come to your thing and say, hey, we need a coach.
I'm like, hey, do you want some evolutionary thinking?
Right.
And I was doing okay as a normal, you could say, effective transformational consultant. So I was earning money as a good professional consultant with big high-tech companies and international companies, NGOs. So I wasn't suffering. I was making, but there was this part of me that was underused. That's the evolutionary part, because I kept getting called for work like, go make this organization better, transform this organization. And, some of them were pretty good people. I work with some good NGOs. I work with, World Bank. I work with USAID. I did some good work in India and Africa and South America. So I was doing good work, but it wasn't quite evolutionary enough. Let me put it away. So let me pause there, because I do want to bring about Maturana, but you can, you could.
Well, I mean, I'm really glad you brought the Jonas Salk story up, because I didn't have any clue that he had this Epoch A to Epoch B vision. It's really interesting, the parallels that you are reporting with, Bucky Fuller and Jonas Salk. Those are real visionaries that they obviously echo the game A, Jim Rutt and Jordan Hall, game A, Daniel Schmachtenberger, game A to game B elements. It's remarkable how much this parallel happens. I mean, obviously in the tree of knowledge, you have the fifth joint point, a metacultural vision of, evolution, where somehow we manage our cultures, and relationships with the earth and the digital virtual world, and the capacity and, finding our way through the portal in relationship to that. So it is striking to me how many people, sometimes I guess I get a mixed feeling. Sometimes it's striking to me how few people see it on the one hand, because it's really there. And then at the same time, it is a very abstract thing. And I'm also sometimes struck by how often, a cluster of people see it with a level of clarity and consistency that's actually quite dramatic. So I love both of those stories. They're really, really fascinating. I really see the thread of your life actually coming on with much more richness and detail than I had before. So this is really enjoyable for me.
Thank you, Gregg. So I'll mention briefly two other teachers, and then we'll take it to what is the relationship, if you want, between evolutionary leadership and other movements like metamodernity.
Definitely, I'd love that.
And any other questions that you may have. So once I got you could say this grounding that we had great thinkers like Bucky and Jonas Salk, who were good diagnostic of the big picture. And once I got that evolutionary leadership could make that contribution, becoming you could say the metaphor, the pilots of this evolutionary journey, I started researching other thinkers and other people that you could say were in that evolutionary track.
Right.
And I got to know the work of Humberto Maturana, for example, the Chilean biologist, and which recently passed away.
Yes,
and I had the opportunity to study with him, and also listen. The first lecture that I heard from him was in 1984. He came to Cambridge at the invitation of Fernando Flores, and also Werner Erhard, who was there was a trio of thinkers at this event, and I happened to be there, and I listened to Maturana, and I would say it was early Maturana, because I distinguish between early Maturana's thinking and later Maturana thinking. This is my own distinction. And the early Maturana focused a lot on biology, and where he got known for autopoiesis and cognition, and the human animal being a linguistic animal. And that piqued my curiosity, because that event that I happened to go to was called Language, Life, and Human Possibility. That was the name of the event. Language, Life, and Human Possibility. So I started paying attention to the power of language, the evolutionary power of language. And then I went to Chile. I studied with Maturana. I took a couple of courses, both in English and Spanish in Chile, because sometimes the group was all English-speaking people, sometimes. And there I got more of a sense of what I would call later thinking Maturana. And later Maturana was more, for me, focusing on the need to evolve the human animal. And the need to evolve this human that he calls Homo sapiens, that towards what he called, today he would call it Homo sapiens arrogans, an arrogant sapiens that destroying life, and evolve it to a Homo sapiens amans ethicus, which he would call a Homo sapiens amans means loving, ethicus, ethical, loving animal.
Wow, wisdom.
He said, he said we need to evolve this human to become this new one. But in order to do that, guess what we need to do? We need to evolve the culture. So now we need a cultural evolution again. So this is becoming familiar with Eric Fromm in my thesis. You can see the repetition.
We can see where this is going.
And he said, we have a culture today that's patriarchal, mistrustful, destructive, destroys human, destroys the planet. So we need to evolve the culture to be a culture of trust, of love, and of ethics. So if you have that culture, including the institution of education, Maturana was heavily involved with education, then if you create that culture, then the chances are you're going to have a healthy, loving human emerge out of that system.
Beautiful.
So now you have a systemic thing. So then I saw that in Maturana, and I said, terrific, back to evolutionary leadership. More work.
Right.
Okay.
More another vision. Yeah. So
let me stop there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I have to say this. I think I mentioned this to you. So in terms of, when you try to do a unified theory of things or solve things, you have to read broadly. And I'm always, as much as I read, I'm always underdeveloped in my reading. And one of my most embarrassing scholarly moments has to do with Maturana and Barella in relation, because after I published my 2003 article, The Tree of Knowledge System in the Theoretical Unification of Psychology, 6 months or a year later, somebody read it and was like, why didn't you cite Tree of Knowledge? Right. A 1987 book, which I know well now. And, it was like, what do you mean? I then had to go online, and then this famous text, okay, with an unbelievably powerful picture of a human and a tree and the brain and the organicity of cosmos, and how you pull it in, and how the knower and the known and the power of language, and how it transforms the human primate into a speaking creature, that blah, blah, blah. We need an organic vision. I felt so mixed in relationship to that, that to this day, I can still feel, as a scholar, you're like, oh no, how did I miss this, But at the same time, I will say it was obvious these are two completely independent. And some people criticize me for calling it the tree of knowledge, because I actually did mean it. And maybe he did also, both in relationship to the Bible, tree of knowledge of good and evil, and in relationship to the tree of, knowledge in terms of organicity, the ways in which knowledge trees work, and branching from a fundamental root or seed, and then all of that. So anyway, I'm here on my UTOKing with Gregg podcast, apologizing. Sorry that, I overlooked that.
No,
but anyway, there's my confessional.
No, you got it. I forgive you.
Thank you. Obviously, I've been carrying that around. I appreciate it.
I forgive you. And what's that expression that says "great minds think alike"?
Yes, I'll take that. Right. That was the positive side of the embarrassment. It was like, wow, there's actually a lot of parallels here.
No, a lot of parallels. And, there's a lot of parallels. I mean, it's interesting because going back to Jonas Salk, he's a biologist, and people only know him as an inventor of the Salk vaccine, not as a big evolutionary thinker, etc. And the same thing with Bucky Fuller. People know him for the geodesic dome. Oh, he did the dome. They don't know that he created this whole transition plan to go from, you could say, epoch A to epoch B, to go from weaponry to livenry, and he was ahead of his time, because he said, look, if you read that 20-page introduction to Critical Path, he says things like, nobody needs to work. Nobody needs to work. And we're talking now about universal basic income.
Yeah.
And he says what people would do is to volunteer. They will learn for life. They will go through several professions, and they will volunteer their knowledge. They would go and say, what do you need? You need agriculture, you need engineering, you need science, but you don't have to worry about earning a living.
Right. No, it's if we could cultivate that mentality, I believe we absolutely have both the technological potential and the psychic potential, although it's very dangerous because it has to be equibalanced in a particular way and to cultivate a particular kind of sensibility. But I absolutely believe that that's our potential, if it's done the right way.
If it's done the right way. So here, let me go back to Maturana for one second.
Yeah.
So Maturana and his intellectual partner, Jimena Davila, they co-author a book that got published a few years ago, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, which is it's called The Tree of Living.
Yes.
The Tree of Living. So it went from the Tree of Knowledge to the Tree of Living. In Spanish is El Árbol del Vivir, which means the tree of bringing the fruits into living. So it wasn't just about knowledge, it's how do we put it into living in action. Right. And in that book, I would say the last 2 chapters, are really clear about the evolutionary steps that we need to take. Again, one chapter is about this new human, the Homo sapiens ethicus amans, the loving ethical animal, and the culture that's ethical and trusting and flourishing. And so those are the last 2 chapters. So if you read those 2, you realize that those are doable. We can do those. But we need to commit to that, because at the end, he says, the future depends on our doing, and our doing depends on the choice that we create for ourselves. So he brings back the responsibility to each and every one of us to bring forth, going back to this bringing forth a human reality with language, with conversations, with our doings, with our vision. So we are the generators of this new evolution.
It's so clear. That's brilliantly put. Yeah.
So then you asked me about how this evolutionary leadership relates to, let's say, Bildung or metamodernity, for example.
Please,
So
yeah. No,
fast forward a little bit. So by the way, I come to California about 7 years ago, and I formed an enterprise here called the Institute for Evolutionary Leadership with my business partner, Fyodor. And, we basically said, let's start offering evolutionary leadership in the Bay Area and other places. So I went from Boston, moved to California. And we've been doing evolutionary leadership workshops and seminars and teachings and having an evolutionary leadership community here in the Bay Area, very active. We're teaching seminars, but I continue to explore.
Right.
I continue to look for strategic alliances. And I continue to see, well, who else is doing evolutionary work in the world. So I will mention, for example, Lene, Rachel Anderson, with the project of Build Them, and also the project of Metamodernity.
Right.
So in my teachings, I come across people, and one of my students in Denmark, where I was teaching evolutionary leadership, said, you should connect with Metamodernity.
Yeah.
And you should connect with these people that wrote this book called Nordic Ideology.
Right.
So there's Hansi, and there's Daniel Gortz. And they say you should connect with Lene Anderson, who also read about metamodernity. So I have connected with those people. And lately I've been in conversations and collaboration with Lene Rachel Anderson, specifically around Build Them. And
of course, if you haven't heard it, she was on the channel a little while ago. For those that have followed the channel, that certainly know her. And Thomas Bjorkman also is a big supporter of this frame of reference.
So they are bringing the Nordic, you could say, philosophy of development. The Build Them philosophy is about creating this new human through education, this human that can be self-authoring, that could be evolving from, you could say, Keegan level 3 to level 5, who can be creative, empowered, and a good citizen of the world.
Right. Absolutely.
I mean, and so you could say, well, that's not very different from Maturana, for example. And in fact, we share with Lene a 4-minute interview with Maturana recently, where he talks about the ideal education. And she was like, wow, we are in sync.
This guy gets it, right?
And of course, he passed away last week, but we have people like Lene and others, and me and you and others who are about creating this evolutionary step forward. So Build Them is about creating this new education system that will produce a new human who, and then this new human that will be able to bring forth the evolutionary step from postmodernity to modernity.
Totally.
So I call that new human evolutionary leader.
All right. Beautiful.
So if you are running a school, a high school or a college president, and you accept Build Them as a curriculum, then you become an institutional evolutionary leader, in my book.
Totally.
Okay. Does that make sense? I mean,
no, it makes total sense to me. I mean, so just so there's a, I'll echo what Lene and I talked about, and obviously I think this echoes, so for me, because I really think this can be shared and distributed. There's a meta-modern sensibility that we can cultivate. It's an include and transcend, not unlike Keegan, not unlike Wilbur. It's a way of but less than Wilbur in particular with his second tier consciousness. It's more inclusive, horizontal, and feminine, at least, especially the way Lene articulates it. I love the 4 stages of sensibility that sort of come before that it embraces. So oral indigenous, appreciating our connection with nature, appreciating our relationships, appreciating our fundamental embeddedness, and the need for presence and participation in that. That's what the oral indigenous sensibility speaks to me. Then you have traditional formal, which is, learning about civilization, getting some sort of theological and wisdom philosophy understanding, knowing how civilizations operate, getting formal logical training, things like that. And, of course, in our own evolutionary history, we're talking the last 5,000 years, the emergence of writing and the traditional societies in Bronze Age into Axial Age. Then you get modern science, and the epistemological advances of that, especially fused with technology. And capitalism and capital labor does a lot of good things in relationship to our control, puts us in the pilot of the global scenario. And then thankfully, in my view at least, we do get a lot of good constructive criticism from the postmodern view, recognizing white male colonial patriarchy kinds of injustice issues, recognizing the danger that this machine, to use a Daniel Schmachtenberger term, this sort of paperclip capital labor production machine can chew up the planet in a particular way if we're not careful. It also is, in all of those societies, we definitely have a bit of a game A, especially in traditional modern, to some extent, postmodern competitive kind of structure that I think we need to transcend. Maybe the oral indigenous sensibility has less of that. Of course, that's much easier perhaps to do in a smaller community. But anyway, the idea of Bildung and cultivating character, I think we're going to release on Thursday Zach Stein's conversation here on the podcast. And I think you may know Zach Stein, but he's certainly big on the philosophy of education. He interprets this transition from, say, game A, game B, or this time between worlds explicitly in the context of education, that we have to then figure out how to socialize ourselves, how to build our character, how to nourish ourselves. And so this brings me to a comment that, one of the themes that ties this podcast together that I'd like to share with you, and then this can kind of get us into some of the conversations about this space, is for me, what I'm seeing in terms of what the tree of knowledge into the garden and, the whole UTOK frame is I'm very interested in our philosophy and our science and what it means to how we understand ourselves. And I really see this podcast as being in search of a coherent naturalistic ontology that can revitalize the human soul and spirit in the 21st century. And so, maybe you can riff off a little bit of that and see how that fits, as I think it does with an enormous amount of your own vision and hope and what you see happening in this space.
Right. No, I do think that it fits, Gregg, with what you call a naturalistic, you could say coherent naturalistic ontology. And it fits interesting because one of the things that I also learned from Humberto Maturana in his workshop, he used to show this diagram, that he would talk about the two basic epistemologies or the two basic ontologies that we humans can navigate to construct our worlds. So he would say, he would start with the human, the Homo sapiens, and he would say these humans exist in emotions and language. But, and depending on the narrative or the explanations that you could say, adopt, because as linguistic animals, we adopt narratives without questioning some of them. We stories, we're storytelling animal, as Harari likes to say, we are the storytelling animal in his book Homo Deus. And we create the stories and then we forgot that we created the story. And then the stories shape us.
That's right.
So, we are in this circular linguistic system. And Maturana explains that very well in this model. And then he goes to the conclusion, depending on the story, the explanation that you either accept or reject or listen to or live by, you move into two potential ontological paths, let's call it that. So one ontological path is what he calls the transcendental, where the world is out there, you know, and you could say there are entities and realities, but everything is outside of the human world. And you can go down the list. And then there's the constitutive, where he prefers to call the constitutive ontology, where the human being as a linguistic animal goes back to the term of bringing forth social realities. And specifically with language and action, we bring forth, for example, a relationship like you and I are doing right now.
Exactly.
We bring in forth a social reality, a relationship. We bring forth societies. We bring forth cultures. So it's naturalistic because it depends on the human being a linguistic, biological animal. And we are bringing forth our civilization. And then he talks about a feedback loop back. These worlds that we constitute, that we generate, come back and shape us. So now you got this flow. So the quality of the conversations shapes the quality of the relationships, which shapes the quality of the world that we bring forth, which comes back. And so it's like, wow. So that to me is a naturalistic, coherent ontology. And
that's beautiful.
Yeah,
I love that. So for me, and the way I would do it is sort of like, you know, I sort of frame sometimes UTOK in terms of the tree, the garden, and the coin. So the tree is like the tree of knowledge. That's like, okay, what did science teach us about what is naturalistically? So that's Big Bang, and then evolution happened, and then over the last, and that's what's been, and we can map that. And we can use science to create some sort of relatively transcendent map about what is independent of humans. We can talk about how dependent it is, but that is a frame of what is. The garden fundamentally is this constitutive narrative that weaves our social world together, and it needs to be pointed toward wisdom. So, you know, the tree is like, well, accuracy, but the fundamental point of the garden is the cultivation of wisdom, because the wisdom feeds back on itself. It is co-constitutive. The ontology it generates influences the ontic reality it becomes in a feedback loop.
Yes.
And so, you know, I love that he makes that distinction. No,
it's great. And the way you describe it, it's beautiful, Gregg. And I would say this is a very challenging part of Maturana's work for a lot of people, because a lot of people who come to study or who came to study with him, they are still in that transcendental mode for whatever.
If you get trained as a scientist, or a particular kind of engineer or analytic person, or
a very, you could say, traditional religious tradition.
Well, there's that too, right? That's a whole other frame of reference to getting transcendent realist claims.
So you could say the constitutive path is challenging. It's what Keegan would say self-altering.
Yep.
In a sense, because then you go, wow, you mean the civilization, the society, the culture that we have is, we created it? Yeah, that's a big responsibility.
That's right.
You know, you cannot blame other beings for this thing. So, you know, you could say, that's like really getting the license to drive the 747.
Well, right. This is why I love your system so much, because essentially it's so congruent with what the UTOK tries to do. I mean, the whole point of the coin is like, well, this is our lives. So the coin this side of the coin symbolizes our lives. And so this is you as Manuel, me as Gregg, and anybody that's listening inside their own epistemological portal. And then you have your particular life world, life quest, you know. And let's face it, each of us, I sometimes use the analogy, each of us are fleas on a Titanic. You know, we're bouncing up. Right. I mean, what the hell can we do? But the collection of fleas might be able to turn the Titanic, right? And the collection of thieves may be able to land the ship in a particular type of way. And but for that to happen at some level, our individual coins have got to connect into a web of narrative that then creates a collective and intelligence system that then legitimizes investment in a particular way, and then realizes, to use John Vervaeke's term, creates a collective recursive relevance realization system that actually drives the system into the future possible space that it can envision. And that is part of this evolutionary leadership task that I see you as really, having an eye on for obviously a very long time, and obviously catching people's visions, whether it's Fuller or Salk or Maturana, and being able to see, like so many visionaries, it's like, listen, this has been a wonderful ride up to a point, but there's actually has to be a transition to a fundamentally new state of being. And then your vision of like, well, wait a minute, how do we lead people to lead this thing? How do we become conscious of that, right?
Right, right.
It's amazing. It's beautiful. I love it.
And there is where again, in my research, and so it wasn't just a good title, Evolutionary Leadership.
Okay.
I set two challenges for myself. One is, what are the key leadership competencies that would enable a person or a group of persons? Because I don't see evolutionary leadership as an individualistic, heroic model. I see it as a collective, groupal. We need each other. We need collective leadership, not individual heroes. So what are the competencies that would enable such a person, such a leader, to be effective in mobilizing our world from, let's say, epoch A to epoch B, or from modernity to post-modernity to meta-modernity. Right. So I chose 7 competencies. When I first started, there were only 5. And then I said, let me add this one. And then I arrived at 7 competencies, which are the toolkit, so to speaking. Yeah. So if sort of like, we need those toolkits, and I just mentioned 2 or 3 of them. I'd actually, that's, you have me curious now. I'd love to hear about the Sure. So I'll go through all the 7 of them very quickly. Please. So one of them has to do with personal evolution. We each can evolve our own minds, like, again, like Keegan would say, or Maturana would say, we can evolve to become a better human, Homo sapiens ethicus amans, or loving animal, or as Keegan would say, level mind 5. So we can do that. So that's competency 1. Gotcha. We need to recognize that we are emotional and linguistic beings. Love it. And as emotional and linguistic beings, we can evolve those emotions and language and narratives and stories to create a better narrative, a better story for ourselves and for humanity. Right. In the UTOK, it's that we're primates and people, emotional primates and linguistic people. Beautiful. Beautiful. Primates. So that's number 2. And there you have a lot of people who are linguistic experts. I studied with Fernando Flores, who was amazing linguistic, who took language from academia and put it into action. The work of speech acts and other work. So that's the second one. The third one is systems thinking. We need to deal with systems, both natural and human-made systems. And there, I had the pleasure to study with people like Peter Senge, Donella Meadows, even Fritjof Capra taking his course on systems thinking. And you could see that it's all the systems view of life. Right. So that's the third competency. We need to go from parts to systems. And with people talk about the capitalist system, this system, but often they don't know what they're talking about a system. Right. They use the word, but they don't understand the mechanism, the process. Right. So that's number 3. Number 4 is we need to be able to deal with systemic sustainability. So systemic sustainability is the 3 systems that are critical for a sustainable society. The human sustainability, the ecological sustainability, and the institutional sustainability. Yes, so in the institutional, you have things like the economy, education, the Bildung education, the government. All the structures that keep the organization flowing. You got it. And they need to be with a purpose of sustainability and flourishing.
Yep.
So that's the fourth one. So the fifth one is, okay, who is going to design it and who is going to build it? So we have here something that is called ontological designing.
Ooh.
And that's a term that needs to be more applied and understood.
Right.
And I happen to learn ontological designing from Fernando Flores, who says we humans are ontological linguistic animals and we are designers.
Yeah.
And we must well be conscious of what we design.
Beautiful. Love it.
And so ontological designing puts us in the designing seat of what is the future that I want to design, what is the systems that I want to design. So we are like the architects of our society.
That's great. There's a book called The Design Way that was very influential that I discovered.
Nice.
I really recommend it. Yep. And it's the philosophy of design. And it's by a computer scientist and an architecture, and argues that a design mindset really is the professional engineering mindset. And it's very different from both a basic scientist, and it's different from a humanities, especially in the arts and performing. And I discovered, it spoke to me tremendously, because actually I'm both a theoretical psychologist who works in the science side of the equation, but I'm also a psychological doctor. So then I enter into the real world and design interventions, and the concerns that they had about how you think about as a designer, which is basically you have desired outcomes in an unpredictable world. That's the task of a designer. You have some notion about where you want to do, but there's all the messiness of reality. And you have to then, how do you operate in the real world to cultivate, as the feedback loops of complexity impinge upon you, how do you steer and make the proper judgments in the context of reality? And it's called The Design Way. It's a play off of like Taoism, as in the way. And it's a very, very, I recommend it. It was very moving to me, because it really did carve out the idea that the academy maybe should be organized as the sciences and the humanities, and really the design professions, which basically are like educators and lawyers and the planners and the people that actually build stuff, institutions, and generate effect. And it offered a particular kind of mindset that was quite distinct and powerful from my vantage point. So I love the idea of the ontological design. It's great.
Yeah. So I'll talk about the last two. Competence. So the sixth one is called adaptive challenges and collaboration, because if we're going to evolve an institution like education or government or capitalism, and it's going to require an adaptive challenge. And the work of adaptive challenge, I give a lot of credit to one of my teachers, Ronald Heifetz, who teaches at Harvard, adaptive leadership. And he says an adaptive challenge is different than a technical challenge, because a technical challenge, you already know the answer. We know how to build a bridge across the San Francisco Bay, and we've done it. But, dealing with climate change, it's an adaptive challenge, requires a change of what he calls values, ways of being, power, and learning. So that is not easy for a lot of people and institutions. And in order to do that, you need to collaborate. So we cannot do climate change as an adaptive challenge or create a sustainable society without the collaboration of the different institutions, the different players. So then the final one is what we call wisdom and vision and wisdom. Vision and wisdom. We need the wisdom to say, is this the right action, the right journey? Here I'm inspired by people like the Dalai Lama, who says we need Buddhist wisdom or wisdom to say, what kind of future do we want as humans? And do we have the visions? The good news is we do have a lot of good visions available to us to create what we call Epoch B. So when people say, well, what does that future look like? I can give them real concrete, tangible scenarios of that future. But I would say that as a network, as a community of, you could say, of futuristic thinkers, we don't do enough of a good job of offering people a more compelling vision of the future. I think we need to do a better job We can talk about meta-modernity, and meta-modernity, we have better humans, better this, better societies. We take the best of all the indigenous and pre-modern world. But we need to give people, a summary that vision is better than what we got today. We need to be better marketing of the vision, not just talk about the present problems.
Right.
So I would say that's something that I think we all need to pay more attention to.
Have you seen good examples of that, or are you hoping for good examples? Do you have any kind of inclinations that would be of what would be like? Yeah, how would we catch and portray the values of the future in an effective way?
Yeah, I mean, if there are people, for example, I mean, I could go back a little bit to Buckminster Fuller and say, he describes that people will have access to education, people would volunteer work, there will be less wars, technology will be used to make humanity successful. So he's got some utopian visions there. You have people like the Telos Institute in Boston who have 3 scenarios for the future. And if you go to their website, the Telos Institute, that they have what they call the journey to Earthland. And they talk about what that Earthland future will be like in different parts of the world. There are some people who will be more, let's say, oriented to agriculture. Some people will be more oriented to technology. Some people will be oriented to communitarian living. So it's not like a homogeneous vision, but it gives you enough of the future that you go, oh, I could easily live 2 years in here and 3 years. It's like people say, I want to live in Berlin for a year. Oh, no, I want to live in the Rocky Mountains for a year. Anyway.
Gotcha.
So yeah, people like Telos Institute. I mean, there's a book that I use sometimes in my course that's 45 Visions for the Future. There is a book that you could buy. It costs like $60. And you have people there like Donella Meadows talking about a future of the world. But we don't communicate them enough. Not everybody's going to buy a $60 book. That's what I meant.
Sure.
And not everybody's going to go to the Telos Institute website.
Yep.
I
really appreciate that. In fact, you shot me an email, and it's definitely been in the back of my mind. It's like, what actually is this UTOK thing about, Greg? Where's it leading? Right?
Let's talk about that.
Let's we can. I'd be happy that we can kind of bring this thing full circle and dialogue about that, and see where we are. But it definitely spoke to me. I love the way you framed it. It was energizing, but it was also it had a point, and I've certainly been I definitely have a 5-year vision. I'm tracking that in a particular way, and I'd love to share some thoughts in relationship.
Yeah, for me, one of the things that talking about vision and wisdom and purpose, because one of the things that I say distinguish evolutionary leadership from other types of leadership, one of the things besides the competencies and the transition from epoch A to epoch B is that there is a purpose, at least declare a purpose. Why are you doing what you're doing? What's the purpose of your organization, or what's the purpose of your social movement? And often leaders don't have an explicit purpose or movements. So when I came across your work and you take care of UTOK, I would say, okay, so we have all this knowledge and we have these brilliant psychologists sharing all this good stuff about the human and the mind. I mean, there was a recent post about the evolution of humans. It wasn't only language, it was cultural evolution. And I thought it was a really good summary. And then my question from my purpose question to you and to that person would be, okay, so what's the purpose of that insight that you just brought here? What if what distinguishes human is cultural evolution? Shouldn't we be designing a purposeful cultural evolution? And if so, what the hell does that cultural evolution look like? How am I going to live in that culture? Am I going to be more loving, more trusting, more leisure, more flourishing? Tell me. But whoever wrote that, stop at right there.
Yes. Right. No, so yeah. I mean, for me, this bridging, and I'm fortunate, I think, in terms of my training, at least, to have access to these voices. The theory side wants knowledge at one level. It's like, hey, I want my coherence. I want my system. I want it to make sense. And that is a valuable thing in and of itself. Knowledge orients in particular ways, just in and of itself for clarity. And then the implications of it that comes second. There's that. But there's also the whole clinician side of me, which basically is like, wait a minute, we're in this for adaptive living. We're in this to be oriented toward wisdom. We're in this, and not just for one person or an elite group of individuals. The fundamental system that is oriented toward the good is a way to gather whatever knowledge you can, gather whatever connection you can, and with integrity, move the needle toward better ways of being in the world. And then it is that vision fundamentally that really is the difference making at its core. So I completely agree. And I love the idea of conscious evolutionary leadership. I mean, it's just, and the idea that what we need to wake up, from a therapeutic perspective. I'll say that, I focus a lot on what are called stages of change and human change processes, at least at the individual and small group level. A friend and colleague of mine who I'll actually see tomorrow in a webinar talked about the process of going from unconsciously incompetent, to consciously incompetent, to consciously competent, and then unconsciously competent. And what he means by that is, hey, we need to wake up and be like, wait a minute, this is not going as well as we can. Right. And actually, I think if there's any good side effect of COVID, it is the sense that I have that more and more people are actually waking up and shifting from our unconscious incompetence to now our conscious incompetence. It's like, oh no, the zeitgeist is a sense. And so then we need leadership that has a vision that says, well, wait a minute, what are some of the problems and what are some of the possibilities for us? And then we can start the process. This is where I really see us now. It's like systems like Bildung and evolutionary leadership and the game B people rediscovering epoch A to B people. And the Zoom and COVID worlds are actually affording us the capacity for informational networking in a different sort of way. And we're all now sort of moving that your angle from, well, where are we're going to come to some awareness at some level, but leveraging that to actual change and seeing how that leadership actually happens is, it's just unbelievably central and crucial to the whole process. That's
it. Thank you, Gregg. That's a good way what you just put in there, waking up to that consciously and incompetence and moving on. And that's our challenge. That's our big, you could say, our big adaptive challenge. So when I asked because I asked that question, not just to your group, what is the purpose? What is the future? Where do you want this knowledge and wisdom to go towards? Because we can, there is a value in doing really good research and coming up with all the connections, but we need to also work towards that future because it's up to us now. And is our, you could say, is a big evolutionary challenge that we cannot avoid. And so I'm sort of like the person who is sort of there kind of bothering you a little bit.
It's a really, in fact, I just sent out a summary to the list because part of that summary is like a 125-word summary and then a couple of definitions of some key things. And basically it says, and that's you were in the back of my head. I got a couple of people nudging me like you are that are, don't just be a theorist. What are you doing it for? There's definitely that. So I'm definitely honing my own, like the UTOK part of this, for me is sort of like, all right, I'm carving out, I am an academic, I'm a theorist, I'm going to carve out a particular intellectual problem, like the Enlightenment gap and the problem of psychology. And that
Right.
affords me an opportunity to be like, my analytic side needs to say, hey, I need to frame what I'm talking about and know what the issue is with a particular kind of reductive analysis. So I can be like, yes, I can point very clearly to the errors that I can then correct. So that's where my systematized mind goes. And then it says, well, the UTOK can address this enlightenment gap and problem of psychology. So that becomes the analytic part that then sets the stage for us to then turn around. Well, if we can actually address the enlightenment gap and problem of psychology, the implications are what? Well, it's like, actually, there is the failure of that shrunk our souls and spirit and caused us to be blind in relationship to our potential.
Right.
And that is what it is that we, in the clinical side of me and the unified approach side and everything's like, that is what we can draw from to connect to like the meaning and mental health crisis at the psychological, philosophical level. And then I also need to connect with leaders who understand institutional systems and economics and international relations and all the other brilliant people that are doing wonderful stuff at various levels of analysis. And if there is an alignment between certain kinds of core problems that some visionaries are able to get, some visions about the various levels of analysis, we nail some of these competences and get together and are guided by people like you who are like, yes, pay attention to the future and where we're going with clarity. Well, maybe this thing can actually happen.
Terrific. Well, this is great. This is great partnership. And again, it's collaboration between different ways of thinking and doing. And I think that's great. So this has been a terrific conversation with you, Gregg.
It's been a really enjoyable conversation. I'm so glad you came on. Is there any kind of either final thoughts or places that links or anything? I can put a link to your center in the show notes.
Please do. You put the link www.evoleadinstitute.com. There are some videos there and also papers and stuff there that you could do that. And lastly, I would say, and I'd say everyone can be an evolutionary leader. This is not something that you have to go to 5-year school program at Harvard or anything like that. Anyone could be a leader, and leadership can be learned. And we need more evolutionary networks of people like us and spread this vision to go from Epoch A to Epoch B. So we need to all share and work together.
Absolutely. I love the loving ethics and wisdom and that all that orientation that speaks so deeply to me. Thank you. Keep nudging me. It's been great.
Okay.
Keep nudging us in the right direction.
All right, thanks, Gregg. Thanks for the invitation. Look forward to future conversations with you and everyone. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Okay.
Take care.